at last, the culmination of my life's work. 16 million megavolts from my lightning-powered generator will bring my creature to life! Oh, well, back to the drawing board. For many years, people have believed that electricity really was the spark of life. And though it won't get Boris here off the table this evening, it does actually get us all out of bed in the mornings. And in tonight's programme, we'll be showing just how near the truth Frankenstein really was.
And also in tonight's programme, we'll be seeing how the power of electricity has brought real music back to this violin. Not with me playing it, I'm afraid. Never.
And we'll also be discovering how our body's own electricity can be interfered with to lethal effect, and why Mr. Takeuchi here has been licensed not to kill.
Now, what's behind it all is the remarkable affinity that our bodies have for electricity, as our volunteer Rachel has agreed to help us to demonstrate. Rachel. Join me in the laboratory. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to try to reproduce Frankenstein's experiment. The only difference being this time we're using a live body. Yours. It's going to start off live anyway. Now, our source of lightning here is this plasma ball. Now, that would have saved Frankenstein quite a bit on his electricity bills because it's only generating an absolutely tiny current, so it's quite safe. Now, if you step over there, and can I ask you to step up to the plasma ball and just put your hand on the top at the back there, and you can see the current goes straight to your hand. Where does it go then? Well, it's passing through your body, which is a good conductor of electricity, down to the earth. Okay, you take your hand off because it's hard to see the electricity doing that, but let's see what happens if you just make a nice good contact with an electric light there. Now, just pop your hand back on the plasma ball and there we go. Light it up. Electricity there is coming through your hand, through your body, and lighting up the lamp here. Just to show there's no cheating, take your hand off again. That's it, on again. And off, and on. Go on all night. What a live wire you are, Rachel. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Great.
Now, Rachel survived that because the current that was passing through her was very small indeed. But if the current is much more powerful, then it's a very different story. David, perhaps you could tell us what happened to you.
I was talking to my fiancée on the telephone. We were talking about the weather, and it was a particularly bad thunderstorm at the time. And the next thing I knew, I was being thrown across the room 2 or 3 yards, and I was face down on the floor, shaking. I'd been struck by the lightning.
Good grief. What happened? Now, Judy was at the other end of the wire. What happened to you?
Well, all I heard was sort of like a real scream, and then absolutely nothing, absolute silence. So I really sort of panicked because I didn't know what to think. I tried calling again on the phone, and all it did was just sort of ring, and no one was answering, so I knew something had happened.
So, David, did you actually lose consciousness?
I don't think so. Might have been momentarily, but my parents were in the house, and they pulled the phone out of the wall and took me to hospital.
Now, what about the electrical charge? Do you know what sort of path it took around your body?
I was using the phone in my right hand, and it went in through my ear and down the right-hand side of my body and out through my leg.
In fact, that was a stroke of luck, believe it or not, because I mean, if it had gone through your chest, then it could well have actually stopped your heart, giving you a cardiac arrest, which, of course, is the way that most people who are struck by lightning, in fact, die. And one tip, if you're caught in a thunderstorm, is to crouch down, sort of like that, with your hands on your legs, so that if you are struck, it just whizzes straight down your arms and legs and straight into the ground. Spares your heart. But so, I mean, are you afraid of thunderstorms now?
A little bit, yes.
Don't blame me. And Judy, do you still ring him up?
No, never replied.
Perhaps you don't have to, because there's a piece of good news resulting from the story, isn't there?
That's right, yep. We got married about 6 weeks ago.
Ah, yes, positively connected at last. Thank you very much.
Although conducting too much electricity through our bodies can be lethal, we do have to generate a certain amount ourselves in order for all our organs to keep going. And to demonstrate some of those electrical circuits at work, we've asked Samas here to show us his power supply. Well, Savas, your muscles are obviously in good shape. Could we borrow them to do a little lighting job?
Yes, of course.
Great. Well, Dr. McGarrick here is going to attach these electrodes to your biceps muscle, and then they'll pick up any electricity that's generated by the muscle. But because they only pick up about 1 millivolt, we're then going to boost that using this amplifier, and it's then fed through into this light bulb. So the only thing controlling the light bulb is the electricity generated by your muscle. All right, if you'd like to start pumping iron. Now, as you're contracting and relaxing your muscle, the light bulb's going on and off. And the harder you pump your muscles, the more electricity you'll produce. So really, you're a generating station all of your own.
Yes, I know. Come in handy in a podcast.
That's true, but for the rest of us, thank goodness, you don't have to have muscles that are quite like yours, because in fact, anybody, even the puniest person, would generate a tiny electric current every time they move their muscles. Savas and Dr. McGarrick, thank you very much.
But in fact, it's not just our muscles that can do that. Our whole body is an electricity generating board, because we've been designed rather like a sophisticated robot, jam-packed with masses of electronics to control our every action. Okay, Tin Twin. This is Tin Twin. They used to be the android member of the Thompson Twins. Remember the Thompson Twins?
Hi there, friends.
Okay, Tin Twin. Now, Tin Twin here is going to show us how that every time we move or think or speak or do anything at all.
Do anything at all?
Steady on, Tin Twin. We use our own internal electricity. Without it, our heart wouldn't beat, our brain wouldn't think, our muscles wouldn't move, our stomach wouldn't digest, our liver and kidneys wouldn't get rid of waste products, our immune system wouldn't operate, our growth hormone wouldn't be produced, our sperm wouldn't reach the egg. In fact, our whole body is totally dependent on the internal electricity that we produce. Isn't that right, Tin Twin?
Right.
Now, where we differ from that android over there is that we're not plugged into the mains. No, we are battery operated. Now, that doesn't mean that we rattle around full of HP7s. Our batteries are the individual cells within our bodies, and every one of them can produce electricity just like an ordinary battery. And to show you the principle of that, let's build a sort of battery here with a piece of copper to make one electrode going into the distilled water there, and a piece of zinc making the other electrode, which goes into the water there. And if we connect those up to this meter, we'll see the electricity flowing. No, we don't, because a vital ingredient is missing. And in our cells, that vital ingredient is common salt. Now, if I add salt to my battery here, you'll see the current start to flow. There it is. And that current should be enough to make our little whirligig go here. Let's just try it. One goes on there, and one goes on there, and away it goes. Now, why should salt be the vital ingredient here? Well, common salt is made up of two chemicals, sodium and chloride. And when it's dry, those two chemicals are connected together because the sodium is positive and the chloride is negative. But have a look inside the tank and see what happens when they're added to water. Then the salt dissolves, and the two chemicals separate. The sodium, which is yellow here and positively charged, and the little green dots there represent the negatively charged chloride. Now, our copper electrode is negative, and opposites attract. So the positive sodium moves over in that direction, while at the same time the negatively charged chloride moves towards the zinc, which is the positive electrode. And it's the movement of those charged chemicals, or ions, which produces the electricity. In other words, as the ions move, the current starts to flow.
And our cell batteries work in much the same way, by getting those ions to move. Now, this is a picture of one of our cells, magnified very many times. Now, that red blob there is the nucleus, the control center of the cell. And this line, which you can see here, that is the protective envelope around the cell. That's the cell membrane. Now, what you can't see is that outside the cell, there are millions and millions of sodium and chloride ions. In fact, we are awash with sodium and chloride ions. That's why your tears and your sweat taste a bit salty. We're really nothing much more than bags of brine. So we've got plenty of salt for the cell batteries, but what about the electrodes? We haven't got hunks of metal. So what do our cells do about that? Well, what they do is to create natural electrodes using a very clever mechanism inside the cell membrane itself. Let's take a closer look at that.
Now, I'm not on top of the world, but I'm on top of the cell. And this spongy stuff underneath my feet represents the cell membrane, which is made up of interlocking fats and proteins, and they together form a waterproof barrier between the outside and the inside of the cell. Now, these things are ions, and we've coloured them differently so they're easier to identify. We've got the positive yellow sodium ions, the green negative chloride ones, blue for calcium, and pink for potassium, both of which, like sodium, are positively charged. And then down here, these holes are channels in the membrane, and each one of those will only allow a certain type of ion to move in and out. So that's a green chloride channel, that one's for calcium, the yellow ones are just for sodium, and this one's for potassium. Now, if I were, say, a potassium ion, this is where I'd get into the cell. But because I'm not a potassium ion, it's all a bit awkward. And even the real ions aren't free to move in and out as they'd like, because the cell's very choosy about what it lets in, and that's how it sets up the battery to generate electricity. It uses a pump, which is here in the membrane. And if I switch that on, it pumps positive sodium ions out from the inside of the cell. Now, once they're outside, they can't get back in again. And so gradually, the outside of the cell will become more positive than the inside. And that allows each side of the cell to act as an electrode, positive on the outside and negative, or rather less positive, on the inside. And so with the electrodes set up, the cell can function as a battery, primed and ready to go. Now, when the cell needs to generate electricity, what it will do is to use these yellow channels, the ones that are just for sodium. What happens is they open up, the positive sodium ions rush in, and just like in our studio battery, it's the flow of ions which generates a current. Admittedly, it's not much of a current, but it's enough to let the cell do its job. And then when that task is finished, the sodium ions are pumped out, and the positive and negative electrodes are set up again, ready for next time.
And that process goes on inside virtually every cell of our body. In each cell, it's their electric current which literally sparks some interaction. So our heart cells use electricity to beat rhythmically like that, and muscle cells like Savis's use it to contract, there it goes, and nerve cells use electricity to grow and to send their messages, and digestive cells use it to digest food. And even at the very start of life, electricity is the force that brings the sperm and the egg together. So, throughout our whole bodies, it's our internal electricity which literally keeps us going.
But the mechanism for generating electricity in the cells is very delicate, and if it's interfered with, then the effects can be disastrous, not to say lethal. Meet Mr. Takeuchi. Now, Mr. Takeuchi is no ordinary Japanese cook, because he is one of select few who've been given a license to prepare a particularly dangerous Japanese delicacy, the puffer fish. Mr. Watanabe, could you ask Mr. Takeuchi, how many people have this license to prepare the food this way?
竹内さん、日本ではこのフードの免許証を取る人は何人ぐらいいるんですか？年間東京でもって150人試験に受かるようです。About 150 people are licensed every year in Tokyo alone.
Now, the reason they need a license is because parts of the puffer fish contain a deadly poison. And it works by blocking off the sodium channels through the cell membrane. That's all it does. But that stops the cells producing electricity. That means the cells can't work and they die. And so, eventually, would we. So, if you eat this fish, you're literally putting your life in the hands of someone like Mr. Takeuchi, who has indeed been licensed not to kill, because he has been trained to identify and to remove the parts of the puffer fish which contain that deadly poison. Now, how long does that training take?
One is at least 4 years, just to learn to get rid of this poison. And then he can take the test for this license.
Right, well, as the fish is so dangerous, why do people try to eat it at all, or even think it's a great delicacy?
It has a very fine flavor, and a tiny amount of poison, if taken, can create effects similar to those of drug, sort of high.
So, puffer fish, a delicious and exciting raw fish dish which looks absolutely irresistible. But I think I'll wait until the chips are ready. Thank you both very much indeed.
So, if our internal electricity is clobbered, we die. But is the opposite true? Can electricity create life? Well, Frankenstein was rather over the top with his experiments, but other experiments seem to suggest that internal electricity can at least create new tissue. Now, inside this tank is Alex. If I can get hold of Alex. Come on, Alex. There we are. Just pretend I'm Ken Livingstone. There we are. Okay. Now, Alex here is a kind of a giant newt. He's an axolotl. And if you'd seen Alex 6 months ago, he would have looked rather different, because 6 months ago, one of his pals bit off his right foreleg, completely off. And as you can see now, it's grown back again pretty well with all its elbow, wrist, fingers. Now, the really remarkable thing is that scientists looking into this particular phenomenon found extra electricity in that limb bud as it was growing, and it really looks as though the internal electricity is literally helping that limb to grow back again. So, time for a dip, Alex. Off you go.
And surprisingly, it seems as if the same thing may happen if you or I damage ourselves. And the Fenton family know all about that. John, tell us what happened to your thumb.
I dropped it in the patio chair.
And what did you do then?
So I got it out.
And you went off to hospital. Mrs. Fenton, what happened after that?
They operated on the thumb, but it got infected, and they had to take the bone away, and they said that it probably wouldn't grow because it had lost the first joint, and well, it has done, and it's got a new nail.
John, can we have a look at your thumb? This is the one that got injured. Now I can see a scar just around there. So that's all your old thumb, and that's the new bit. Does it work just as well as the other one? Yeah, that's great, isn't it? Now, it seems remarkable that a thumb tip can regrow after it's been chopped off, but actually that's quite common. What is intriguing, though, is that when doctors have looked at the electrical activity in a regrowing fingertip, they found electrical currents that are very like those in the axolotl's regenerating limb. So it seems that there is a similarity. Now, John, they didn't manage to take any photographs of your thumb when it was regrowing, did they? Well, we've got some medical pictures of somebody else's fingertip regrowing, so if you don't like that sort of thing, you just keep your eyes shut for a few seconds. Now, after just a few days, the wound still looks pretty nasty, but it seems that once the electrical currents get going, the fingernail is able to grow back, and this is after about 7 weeks, and then by 12 weeks, the fingertip is virtually back to its old shape. Now, no one really knows exactly how those electrical currents are working, but it may be by attracting lots of white blood cells to the injury site, so that helps the healing process and helps the fingertip to regrow. Mind you, however it happens, it did a pretty good job for John. John, Mr. and Mrs. Fenton, and Victoria, thank you very much.
Well, if our own electricity seems to have a healing effect, why not boost it with a current from outside? Well, the ancient Romans beat us to it. They thought of it first, AC/BC. In the days before aspirin, they thought that they could cure a headache by putting one of these brutes on their heads. It's an electric eel. And on a good day, this one could deliver up to 450 volts. Now, these eels, like Savas, who we saw earlier, generate the electricity in their muscles and then use it to stun their prey. And the old Romans thought that a shock from one of these could blast away a hangover. Well, personally, I doubt very much that they'd cure a headache, but 450 volts, it'd take your mind off it, wouldn't it?
But the idea that we can use electricity to boost the body's natural healing process is still very much with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hilary Hurd. Very good fiddling. Have a seat. Now, of course, not so long ago, you couldn't actually play the violin. You had to stop. Why was that?
Yes, that's right. I was involved in a road accident and broke my collarbone and had the usual treatment for it, but it didn't mend. And a year later, I was still walking around with a broken collarbone.
A whole year later?
Yes, yes.
Now, in fact, we've got an X-ray of your collarbone at about that time. And if you look at that, we can see there, up there in the top right-hand corner, just under the figure 11, there's the collarbone going across, and there's that horrible break there. Now then, that should have healed up by then. So what did you do next?
Well, I was referred to the London hospital, where it was suggested that I try this new treatment using electricity. Electricity.
Now, the idea there is that when a bone breaks, scientists have discovered that there are electrical forces set up between the ends of the bone, and that helps to sort of deposit the new calcium, new mineral, to make new bone. So the treatment they gave Hilary was to use electrodes, and you can see these electrodes here, and those tips, the tips of the electrodes there, were implanted into Hilary's shoulder, so that each tip was at the end of the collarbone, each end of the collarbone like that, and the wires came out through the plaster. In fact, this battery here was also embedded there in the plaster. And you had that on for how long, was it?
For 3 months.
3 months. And let's have a look at the X-ray 3 months later. You can still make out the ends of the bones, the ends of the broken collarbone under the sort of 12 there, but there's a whitish shadow, and that's new bone tissue forming. So that seems to be working very, very well indeed. How's it been since then?
Oh, marvellous. There's no difference really beforehand. Before it was very painful. And since I had the plaster off, it gradually got less and less painful, and I have no trouble with it now at all. It's made a big difference.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, of course, they're still testing this treatment at the London Hospital, aren't they? Because
I believe so.
they want to see if it works for everybody, but it certainly worked for you, Hilary.
It certainly has, yes.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Sometimes our circuits can become so badly damaged that no amount of electricity, either internal or external, can help them to heal properly. But in certain cases, we can replace the body's electricity. Now, for Gavin, the nerves connecting his brain and the muscles in his leg were damaged, so that although the muscles themselves are perfectly healthy, the messages just can't get through to make them work properly. Gavin, can you tell us what happened to you?
Well, I had an incomplete spinal injury after complications following surgery.
Right. Now, you've been having some new treatment. Could you tell us about it? Because your left leg certainly was quite useless before it, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I had no movement at all in my left leg. And I've just started a new programme up in Phillips Hill Spinal Unit in Scotland. And it's a 2-channel electrical stimulator. It simply passes an electrical current from an electrode at the top of your quad muscle to an electrode at the bottom of your quad muscle. And when you hit the switch on your crutches, you actually lift your foot and take a step forward. So let me show you.
Oh, no. By all means.
Love showing.
Now, Dr. Barnett, you helped to develop this treatment at the Strathclyde University Bioengineering Department. What benefits have you been able to give to Gavin?
Well, without the stimulation, Gavin would have to depend on some sort of mechanical bracing on his left leg, which would keep his knee straight. But as you can see, the stimulation causes a much more natural gait pattern.
And yeah, I see you get up and down steps, which is, I think, a big change.
Can't do that in a wheelchair.
Right. Now, what are your long-term aims in this program of research?
Well, it's not miracle work that we're doing here. Unfortunately, there are limitations, and it's not appropriate for all patients, unfortunately. But as the techniques are developed, what we're hoping for in time is to add a little extra independence to the life of a spinal cord injured patient.
Right. Well, it may not be miracle work, but it's very impressive. Thanks both very much indeed. Thank you.
So if we can use electricity to boost our own natural healing and even replace it when anything goes wrong, how much further can we go? Well, we're already familiar with the artificial heart pacemaker. There's now an implant which can stimulate the muscles of the diaphragm to help us breathe. There are acoustic devices which can be implanted into the ear to help us hear. And in the pipeline, we've got artificial electronic vision, and not very far away, an electronic way of helping nerves to regenerate, all thanks to the microchip revolution. In fact, if Frankenstein had been around today, who knows what wonders he might have created.
And it isn't just Frankenstein who was fascinated by the potential of electricity. The fact that our bodies are good conductors has been used by entertainers since at least Edwardian times. And now, here's a modern practitioner of the art, Brian Lawrence. Brian, I gather you charge yourself up by standing on that box.
That's true.
Now, how many volts are you passing through your body?
In the region of 80,000 volts. So I suggest you don't try these effects at home.
No, I think we'll be quite happy to leave it to you. Brian, the floor's yours.
Electrifying performance, and from all of us for now, it's good night. Take it away.